Hi, I'm Jason from Stratagames, and I wanted to talk to you today about a token deck that I have been loving in Commander. Now, token decks are a pinnacle of EDH, beloved by old and new players alike because they have a straightforward game plan, they're easy to analyze how well you're doing based on your board state, and dropping tons of creatures on the board is just plain fun. Personally, I always avoided making a token Commander deck, except for Griswold, which kills the tokens immediately, because those decks just felt a little too simple to me. There are so many good cards to support that strategy, and for me, the games get a little bit repetitive. Play a doubling season effect, then a big creature that makes a lot of tokens, and finally finish everyone off with an overrun effect. The decks seemed to build themselves, and that's just not my preferred playstyle. Then I realized those straight ABC token decks rely heavily on green for its efficient doubling, token producing, and overrun effects. A token deck without green, and without black where I'd be sacrificing all the tokens, finally sounded like a deck I could get behind. And then when Raff, Weatherlight Stalwart was printed, I knew that I had to give him a try. Our commander illustrates 4 key areas we want to focus on to further our game plan. His first and I would say primary ability requires tapping 2 creatures to get a bonus. So our first goal is to make enough creatures to take advantage of this ability every time we cast an instant or sorcery. Then we'll need to cast instants and sorceries to trigger him, meaning we want a high number of them in the deck. Because we have to tap 2 creatures for every spell cast, though, this isn't like an Izzet Spellslinger deck where we want to cycle through cheap cantrips. Rather, we want our spells to have big impacts on the board and make sure we have the tokens to tap for them. The third focus is if we're already tapping our creatures with Raff, might as well gain as much advantage for tapping our creatures as possible. And the fourth part is Raff's second ability. It pumps our team, though it costs a good chunk of mana. Now, we're already going to have enough creatures to use his ability because of part 1, so the focus here is reliably having enough mana to use this ability once or even twice in a single turn. To achieve our first goal, we need to have cards that will continually generate tokens, growing our army every single turn. Since the deck already wants to be casting instants and sorceries for part 2, any card that creates tokens for doing so is great in this deck. You can even stack these triggers with Raffs so that you'll make a token first and then immediately tap it to draw a card. We can also generate a ridiculous number of tokens from Oketra's Monument and Adeline. Once we've created a few tokens, we need spells to trigger Raff's draw ability. The best ones are those that we can cast multiple times. Purify the Grave, Faithful Mending, and Emerge Unscathed provide cheap utility that can trigger Raff twice. Increasing Devotion and Battle Screech continue to make tokens, and Battle Screech, Prismatic Strands, and Gaze of Justice start to dip into part 3, tapping our own creatures. Other cards to tap our own creatures include Sky Hussar and Shared Discovery for extra card draw, Devout Chaplain and Gallows at Willow's Hill for repeatable removal, and Scab Wrangler to tap down enemy creatures. I know the Wrangler doesn't look great, but it's honestly one of the best cards in this deck. All you need is 3 creatures, and suddenly you can persuade whoever has the scariest creature at the table to attack someone else, or else you'll just tap it. 3 creatures gives you political power, and 6 or 9 creatures, which aren't too hard to get in this deck, means right before your turn you can tap down 2 or 3 blockers, leaving an opponent vulnerable. If you need to, you can then give your team Vigilance with Raff, attack, and before it blocks, tap down a couple more creatures. It's been so strong I'm considering adding Sandsower, even though it's twice as expensive. Now that we have tons of ways to tap our own creatures, part 3 focuses on gaining benefits from doing so. Stonybrook Schoolmaster and Patrol Signaler can provide even more tokens. Fallow Sage draws additional cards. Skirtiller allows us to drop extra lands from our hand or even graveyard that we'll inevitably have from drawing so many cards every turn. And Daring Thief can trade a random 1/1 token for the enemy's commander or their scariest threat. After we've made an army, accrued value in the midgame, we need some finishers, which come in the form of Team Pump. Of course, we got my girl Elishnorn, Grand Cenobite, or will be one hell Phyrexia. Depending on how much mana we have, Intrepid Adversary can grow our team massively. Leonin Lightscribe fits perfectly in the deck, rewarding us for casting instants and sorceries, something we already want to do, by pumping our entire team. Finally, Pride of Conquerors is truly phenomenal, basically always giving our team +2/+2 for only 2 mana. It's a very big swing of damage that people are not going to see coming. Now, every deck should probably include a couple board wipes, and I've cut back significantly from what I used to do. I used to run about 5 in every single deck, and now I'm running 2 to 3 because game's gotta end. And of course you want to play cards with the highest synergy possible, so my board wipes are Hour of Reckoning and Martial Coup, which help my token theme, and Cleansing Nova because we only run 2 enchantments and 5 artifacts in the entire deck. And that brings me to Mana Ramp. Yes, only 5 artifacts in the deck, and only 2.5 of them really ramp us. A couple months ago, Sam Black, a magic dude, discussed how mana rocks feel unnecessary in every commander deck. Not that you shouldn't play them at all, just that there are some decks you don't need the mana and would probably prefer to play more impactful 1, 2, and 3 drops. Now, I was always of the opinion that mana ramp was integral to Commander, necessary to play properly. And maybe that's true if your goal is optimization and winning, but since winning is not the super objective of Commander, and since Raff naturally wants to be playing cheap creatures and spells instead of mana ramp, I figured why not try to implement this philosophy for this deck. The only cards in this deck that could be considered ramp are Scaretiller, Oketra's Monument, Keeper of the Accord, and Soul Ring. The first three are just perfect synergy pieces, and certainly don't act as ramp to boost your turn 2 or 3 play, but to give incremental value over the game as a whole. As for Soul Ring, it's a little different. I wanted to cut mana rocks because I didn't want to spend 2 or 3 mana now to get an additional 1 mana on future turns. It's an investment that I decided I didn't want to make for this deck. Soul Ring is not an investment. It immediately jumps you 1 mana on the turn you play it, and it's leagues beyond any 2-drop mana rock. Now this may seem counterintuitive because I mentioned that part 4 of Raph's game plan is to make sure to have a reliable amount of mana to be able to use his pump ability. But as long as we're playing creatures early and tapping them when we cast instants and sorceries to draw cards, we're going to be able to have a steady stream of cards, and as long as we have enough lands in our decks, we won't miss a land drop for the whole game. To that end, I've upped the lands from 37 to 43. This is going to make it so that we don't just reliably hit our land drops on turn 3, 4, and 5, but with all of our card draw, reliably on turns 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 mana is how much we need to activate Raph's ability twice, and that's often a game-winning move. Now, without the mana ramp, we're probably going to take 10 turns to get there, but as long as we're making creatures, tapping them for card draw, and making value in a lot of other ways along the game, we're going to have no problem getting to turn 10 with all the mana we need and being able to close out the game from there. This deck's strengths are that it makes lots of creatures early, which means you're not going to be getting pinged for damage early or whenever there's a board wipe, because you can usually have a creature to block. Making tons of chump blockers, so if somebody has a giant threat, it really needs trample or some form of evasion to be able to deal you any damage. It draws lots of cards, has a mana sink in the command zone, and has lots of flashback spells, meaning you're always going to have something to do with your mana. It plays a lot of instants, which means you're able to play on your opponent's turns rather than tapping out on your own turns. And above all else, it's really fun. Being able to tap all your creatures for assorted value just to cast a 2-mana spell to untap them all and do it all again. Oh my gosh, that's just music to my ears. I hope you enjoyed this deck tech. The link to the deck is in the description. If you want to follow us on social media, you're already on our YouTube page. We post things on Twitter if you're interested in more Magic stuff or occasionally food stuff. We're on TikTok. We make some shorts there. You'll see most of the same shorts here. And yeah, you can definitely tell when I go off script.